There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today, my guest is Paul Darley, who is the Chairman, CEO, and President of W.S. Darley Company. Let me tell you a little bit about Paul and the company. In 1997, he became President and Chief Operating Officer and was appointed CEO in 2003. He was named Chairman in 2011. Under his leadership, sales have increased over 5,000% to over $625 million in 2021. He began in pump sales in 1985 and was named Vice President for Fire Pump Division of Darley in 1990. Founded in 1908, W.S. Darley Company is a fourth-generation family business led by Paul and an executive team that has transformed this 114-year-old company into a world leader in the firefighting and defense industry. Paul is a graduate of St. Ignatius College Prep in Chicago. He holds a BS degree in marketing and finance from Marquette University, and he earned his MBA from Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, where he is a guest lecturer and an executive in residence. Paul has traveled to 80 countries in his 37-year tenure and has made over 500 industry speaking engagements. He is involved with numerous charitable, business, and service organizations, and he is a former chairman of the Chicago Windy City chapter of Young Presidents Organization and is a trustee for Dominican University. He is a past president of the Fire Apparatus Manufacturers Association. He also serves on the board of directors for the Fire and Emergency Manufacturers Service Association. Paul currently serves on the board of the National Defense Industry Association for the Great Lakes chapter. He is an author of the book Sold, The Art of Relationship Sales. The book highlights emotional intelligence and authentic leadership to sell more, work your way up the corporate ladder, and what you do once you get there. Paul is married to his high school sweetheart of 36 years, and together they have raised 3 daughters in Elmhurst, Illinois. So Paul, welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's just an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, Chief, thank you. It's an honor. The pleasure and honor is all mine, but I really look forward to it.
Well, thank you. Paul, can you share a little bit about, with our audience, the story of the Darley Corporation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Randy. So our company was founded by my grandfather here in Chicago in 1908. He actually modeled our company after Sears Roebuck's catalog. And back in those days, a lot of the catalog companies were headquartered here in Chicago because they could ship easily with the trains and all the rest. And so Montgomery Ward and a few of the others were here. And it started off as a municipal supplies company in 1908. In 1926, he decided he wanted, and he had morphed into firefighting equipment and law enforcement equipment. And in 1926, he decided he wanted to build fire trucks. And back in those days, most of the fire truck builders, you know the names, Mack and Aaron Fox and Seagrave and, the list goes on and on. They all made their own cab and chassis. And so as part of a disruptive model, if you were, he went and had a kind of a historic meeting with Henry Ford, began building fire trucks on a Ford Model T chassis and sold them out of our catalog. And this was at a time when all those other builders were selling their trucks for anywhere from, $8,000 to maybe $20,000. And he introduced in 1926 a complete fire truck for $695. So we actually have here in our headquarters, the very first truck we ever manufactured is here. All of a sudden, boy, we had a big assembly line downtown Chicago. We were shipping these by rail all around America, Podunk, Iowa. They could all of a sudden afford he was offering financing. And in the early 30s, those fire truck builders got together and they said, wow, what are we going to do about Darley? And nobody would sell us a fire pump. So they went to the fire pump companies, put pressure on them saying, if you sell the Darley, you'll be the only customer, they'll be the only customer you have. And so he was left with an alternative. Do I get out of manufacturing fire trucks or do I build my own pump? And he obviously chose the later, and he went and he hired the chief engineer from our pump supplier, which was American Steam Pump Company at that time. The gentleman's name was Pete Yates, and he said, look, I'll build these pumps for you, but I want to do it in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, which is where he was originally from. The lumber industry had moved out of there. There were great craftsmen in the area. And so my grandfather liked to hunt and fish. It's 350 miles away back in those days. I don't know, I suppose 2-3 day trip, but he did the deal. And so really our pumps were saved for our own vehicles and as well as for military till almost the mid 1980s when I became our very first fire pump salesperson and really began offering those pumps to other fire truck builders. And during World War II, we provided hundreds of fire trucks and thousands of pumps to the U.S. military. After the war, those were left around the world and became really a springboard for our international business, which of our fire business, I would say, pre 5 years ago, with a lot of the world's kind of shut down under trade rules and other things. But prior to that, probably in most years, 50% of our business, our pump business, would be overseas. And we've also grown our business here domestically. We've grown our pump business quite a bit. We still serve the U.S. military and providing, every ship has a Darley P100 pump. We make a lot of pumps for fuel transfer and other military applications. And most people are really surprised when they hear that we build about 5,000 pumps a year of all types. So between our Darley company and one of our other divisions, which is our older division. And so today we're a fourth generation family business. I'm third generation. I serve at the, based on my family's input, I serve as the chairman and the CEO and president of our business, and we're transforming our business as we move on to our fourth generation. In my generation, there's a total of 14 owners. At one time, 12 of those owners worked in the business. We're down to about 5 now after retirements. In the next generation, there's 31 family members, 7 of whom currently work in the business. And we realized back in the mid-1980s, probably mid-1990s, that, if we were going to have the lifestyle that our parents had enjoyed, we were going to have to grow this trough if we were all going to be able to eat out of it. So we went and we looked for some blue oceans, and those blue oceans for us were Department of Defense work. So and that was primarily distribution outside of firefighting. So today, roughly 90% of our $600 million plus in sales go to the Department of Defense, and another roughly $100 million serves the U.S. Fire Service and fire services abroad. So we've really transformed ourselves, but still our roots are clearly in our heart is clearly with the fire service as it's been for generations of family.
Yeah, that's a very unique story because you don't hear. At least today, the family heritage being carried forward like Darley has been able to do, and congratulations.
Thanks, Randy. And it's important to know, we didn't dig the wells that we're drinking from. That was my grandfather, that was my father. I mean, we've dug additional wells, but we had a great, jump start and just an amazing legacy that we're hoping to carry on.
Yeah. Well, I had the opportunity to meet with your dad several times. What an amazing individual he was.
He sure was. Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
I know throughout your life you've faced some situations that have kind of helped to shape who you are and who you've become as not only as a person, as a leader. And I wondered if you could, share a little bit about some of those experiences that have brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I'm actually humbled to be here, and I actually feel a little uncomfortable after having listened to so many of your podcasts. I certainly, by most of your readers or listeners, viewpoint would be someone who came from privilege, maybe a silver spoon. I don't like that expression, but a silver spoon perhaps. And particularly after I listened to the stories of Malenga from, Zambia, being imprisoned falsely. And I listened to, Reggie Freeman talk about, the bigotry and racism that he felt or experienced. And Pat Kenny with, his, heartbreaking story of his son, Sean, his wife, Elaine. And, so, but part of that privilege, I suppose, put me in a position where I was exposed to amazing leaders throughout my life. And I was able to, including presidents of the United States and things of that nature. And I was able to look at these folks and see what I really liked in them and try to emulate and repeat that. And also look at a lot of different leaders and say, that's not a trait that I would like to, espouse. So, as we step back and look at my own experiences, while I was raised a privilege, I was raised in a town that was probably upper middle class, but by far I thought we were the poorest family in town. I mean, I don't think I could go through the hand-me-downs and look, I'm not looking for the woe is me, but I will tell you, when I was 16 years old, my oldest brother, who was 25 at the time, committed suicide. 2 years later, my mother, when I was 18, my mother died of cancer after a long battle there. When I was my early 20s, my best friend and neighbor and cousin also died of cancer. And so, I took on this mantra at a really early age that, everything happens for a reason. You could call it God's will, you could call it fate or whatever. And that really kind of helped me get through those emotional times. And I also, at the same time, said, boy, carpe diem became probably my mantra at the time. In addition to that, making sure that, I was out seizing life and making sure that I wasn't going to squander this precious time, not knowing, how long we would have. And, I guess through my 30s, I adopted this work hard, play hard. And, I think I was 7th out of 8 kids in a family business that, ultimately my family, recommended me and selected me as the leader of our business under the guise of what's called a cousin consortium. In a family business, it's very common in a multi-general family business where each one of the branches, we have 3 branches in our family today, be properly represented in the leadership company. But we also felt it was important to have one leader to our employees, to our spokesperson, the buck stops here type of thing. So it's a collaborative effort, but it's at the same time, it was this drive of being 7th out of 8. I remember as a kid, if you can imagine, I used to get $1 a week for candy. You could buy candy for a penny. And I would go up to our landing at our house and I'd get all my older brothers down on their knees and I'd say, "Who's the king?" And I would go in and I would throw out penny candy until, they would humor me. And then I had to jump over this banister and lock myself in the bathroom before they could beat me up or whatever. So it was kind of it's these small things. Well, I certainly wasn't imprisoned falsely and all these other terrible things. I had a lot of different phases and experiences in my life. Plus, as you mentioned, I had this amazing father who was one of the greatest, leaders that anyone has ever been exposed to. And I was able to learn and watch, him. So as I went on to my 30s, I think my mantra became work hard, play hard. And in my early 40s, I was at a conference, a CEO conference, and they said, "Well, what's your mantra?" And I went around, I said, "Geez, mine is work hard, play hard." I was with my wife, Heidi. And she said, "Well, my mantra is be nice." And they said, and the gentleman 2 people over from me said, "Well, mine's a lot like Paul, except it's work hard, play hard, and give back." And I remember it, Randy, hitting me like a dagger in the heart, thinking, oh my gosh, how did I miss giving back? And I think, part of us, and as we grow up, you're putting food on the table, you're wanting it's maybe a hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But so really now, as I've moved into this, phase in my late 50s, really focus on working hard still, playing hard still, but making sure that I'm giving back in a variety of different ways. So those are probably what's formed me as a person. I would also say too, I had my 45th grade school reunion a couple of weekends ago, and and one of the things that really dawned on me, my wife and I were driving home, and I said, none of those people have changed. They're all the same. Eddie Shannon's the same guy who was pulling pranks on me in first grade. And I know when you're in prison falsely or whatever, those things will certainly obviously change a person. But for the most part, if you haven't had these major traumatic events in your life, my experiences have been, look, people probably don't change that much.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
So, you've been in business a long time. You've been running just a significant corporation. And how important do you think it is to be focused on excellence in an organization?
I think it's incredibly important, but I also feel, regardless of what field you're in, I think back to the books that have really been impactful on me, Larry Bossidy's Execution or Good to Great, and I'm always focused on, I'm a lifelong learner, whatever I can do to improve. And, the chances of us going from a 4th generation to a 5th generation business are less than 0.25%, so I do everything that I can, and we do everything that we can to better those odds by learning from others and all the rest. So I would say it's incredibly important. I resonate a lot with, I think, you're often going to be judged by, my dad used to always say his legacy, he won't be judged by going into China. He won't be judged by, maybe other business ventures that he did, but it'll ultimately be judged on how well the company, his legacy was with the company being perpetuated after he was gone. So I think of that a lot. And with that excellence, I guess it's not just a daily showing up daily. That certainly is a part of it. I think it's a culmination of those things. But I also just think how people, I once heard, your success and happiness in life will be equal to, as well as your wealth. I don't like to really throw that in, but I will be the average of your 5 closest friends when you die, So I think if you hang out with, winners, you're going to be a winner. And you hang out with losers, you're going to be a loser. I think of like Michael Vick, with the, here he's an NFL quarterback, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And he goes back and, gets in dogfights with all of his, guys who he grew up with. I mean, he should know better. So I would also say, look, find something that you love to do. It's hard to be excellent at something unless you truly enjoy doing it. I was listening to a quick podcast with Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, recently. And he said, "What's the worst advice you ever heard anybody give somebody?" And he said, "Oh, follow your passion." And I'm thinking, because I follow, that's one of my things that I always tell young people. Find something you love to do. You'll never work another day in your life. And and Mark Cuban said, "That's the worst advice you could give anybody." And boy, it certainly got my attention. And he said, "Yeah, because look, if you're 5'2" and 250 pounds and your goal is to be on the Dallas Mavericks, it's not happening. So it's got to be follow your passion, but within your capabilities, within those areas where you can be excellent." And so I think you've got to get in your swim lane. You can't be excellent at everything, but continue to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah. Well, speaking of books, in your book, Sold, you talk about the importance of emotional intelligence and authentic leadership as the basis, the foundation to be successful. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. And I actually have a copy of it here. It's available on Darley.com or Amazon. All the proceeds have gone to charity, but and I do a lot of speaking on it. And I'll tell you, I was blessed. You're going back to that privilege. I was selected. There was a very well-known CEO here in the Chicago area. Jim Leotote was his name. The University of Illinois Business School here in Chicago is named after him. It's one of his sons is Jimmy John Leotote, who started the Jimmy John Sandwich Company. All these different areas. And he took me and 8 other CEOs under his wing about 10 or 12 years ago with the understanding that he was going to teach us emotional intelligence. We went through a formal program at the college, at the university. He was going to go and really educate us on emotional intelligence, authentic leadership, and we had to then go forward and pay it forward to others. So, emotional intelligence came around about 30 years ago through Daniel Goleman, who, wrote an article in Harvard Business Review titled, "Why Would Anyone Want to Be Led by You?" And, there's really 4 quadrants. And today, Fortune 500 companies, 95% of them select their C-level C-suite employees, that's particularly their CEOs, based on their emotional intelligence more than any other factor. So it's often referred to as your EQ, just like we measure our intelligence through an IQ. This is EQ. And unlike IQ, EQ can be actually improved. Some studies will show it can be improved up to 30% in certain areas. And there's 4 areas or 4 buckets of emotional intelligence. The first 2 are really about yourself. So it's number 1, being aware of your self-awareness and working on your shortcomings and making sure that you're, working on your shortcomings, but also leveraging your strengths that you have. The second bucket, it's kind of a 2x2 McKinsey matrix, if you will. So upper left is your self-awareness. You move over to the right, you've got your self-regulation. How well are you able to control your own emotions? Do you interrupt people? Do you say dumb things? I often think of like President Trump in these areas, where he should have just regulated it, but it was really hard for him. And so then you move down to the bottom 2 matrix, which are your social awareness. What is your ability to walk into a situation, size up the crowd, understand what's going on, read the emotions in there. And then the last is your relationship management. That's in the lower right-hand quadrant. And that really talks to, making sure that that's how you motivate people to action. And the reason why these Fortune 500 companies are so in tune with EQ is because nobody does it alone, right? So if you're going to be a leader today, you've got to be able to motivate people to action, and they've got to want to really, it needs to be intrinsic. It can't be something that it needs to be something that they've been involved in helping to formulate. It means that they've been heard, that they really truly believe in, and it's a clear message that's been communicated to them. Here's the need. Here's where we're going. And so, yeah, as I look at emotional intelligence today, look, CEOs are hired for their ability to listen, communicate the message, and motivate people to action. And I don't care whether that's a priest in your church or whether that's a CEO or a fire chief or whomever. CEO, the EQ is really critical today.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of, I guess, leads into the next question is, what's your assessment of the leadership today that we see in our society?
I grew up in my household. I had my father was a staunch Republican. My mother was a bleeding liberal Democrat. And every election season, we would have a Republican sign and a Democrat sign up in front of our home, and it was really it was never as hostile as it seems to be today. It seems like my mother was all about social justice. She was a social justice advocate, and it seems like today they almost seem to be somewhat binary. And so I think the nation, I think, in many respects is screaming for leadership that is not so partisan and all the rest. And I also think back, when I was in my 30s and 20s and all, I was totally focused on Jack Welch. I mean, he was the guru. You think back, leader of GE and all. But now I go back and I look at Jack Welch's life and look what happened when GE. When he left GE, it really pretty much went to pieces. In fact, if you look at they were part of the original Dow Jones Industrials. They actually were the last of the original Dow Jones Industrials to leave the Dow Jones in 2019 because of their poor performance. So the last of the original companies. And I think of his legacy. I think back to my dad, that story I just told you about my father. How will he be thought of? And so, look, leadership styles change, and I look at some of these new leaders today, whether it's a Simon Sinek or a Gary Vaynerchuk, I think is his name. I can never pronounce it properly. That these young, Generation X, Generation Z, millennials are really, focused in on, and I like the messaging. Today it seems to all be about purpose. It seems to be about making sure that you're making a difference in the world. It's sustainability and ESG and corporate social responsibility. And I think those things are becoming more important than ever in the corporate world and also in our public service world. So, I think that the role of a leader, you think back to, 100 years ago, leadership was all about command and control, right? I mean, that was the leadership style. Today, it's gone more. I mean, and if you can almost block it in 20-year segments if you study it. Today it's more about empower and cheerlead. So making sure that, and so I think that pendulum area, the way that the movement of leadership today is headed in the right direction because it's focused on. This authenticity, in the last 3 years, you probably have read a lot about compassionate leadership seems to be the new buzzword. In fact, Harvard Business Review had an excellent article about it, and it's really an offshoot of the COVID situation. There's a silver lining in COVID. That might be one of them. It's this movement toward making sure that we are truly listening and being aware to all of our, employees and constituents' needs. And so I think that overall that, we're getting too soft. I don't know if we're getting too soft or whatever, but I do think it's interesting to watch where this movement is going. And maybe some of it is, supply and demand with, the job availability, and you've got to do different things now to attract a workforce that you didn't have to do 10 or 20 years ago. So yeah, those are probably my general thoughts relative to modern day leaders. But I would say overall, I think despite what's going on in Washington, D.C. and stuff, I think we're seeing great leaders emerge, both in the fire service. We recently lost Bobby Halton, as you know, and gosh, I mean, what a blow that was to the fire service, and just a great friend of both of ours. I know he served on our fire advisory board for over 5 years, and when I look at the icons and the role models, Alan Brunacini and others in our industry, yourself. Chief, as I look at these role models, They're probably my generation's, role models. And today, maybe the 20 and 30-year-olds, would maybe look at us and say, gosh, I can't relate to those people as well as I can relate to a Simon Sinek type of leader. So I think we have to adjust our own styles to make sure that we are we're appealing, for lack of a better word, to these next generations.
Yeah, I think the real shift toward looking at how you build your culture and your talent pool, and bringing your employees to the center of that discussion, and making sure that they're engaged in the upper end dialogue, and how to actually create that is a significant shift from what we've seen in the past. And I think it's an important shift, and I think it's one, as you said, I think I'm in agreement with. I think it's gonna help to lay the foundation for our organizations to move forward effectively in the future. I just wish that our federal government would take on the same perspective and look at what they're doing and put the people that they represent at the center of their discussions.
Yeah, right on. Isn't that the truth? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of party versus party and me versus them, and it's a very negative culture, and what gets lost in that is the work, the really important work that needs to be done on behalf of the citizens of this country.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think you've pointed out that leaders are, and you just mentioned that leaders are always growing and kind of developing their skill set, even when you're at the top spot. And how important is that if you want to stay in the top spot and you want to be effective as a leader?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I mean, I go to just about every family business seminar, leadership seminar that I can get my hands on. So I'm constantly learning, lifelong learner. I don't know what I'm chasing, answers to what exactly that question is, but I pick up bits and pieces and nuggets and all of these things that help me to be a better leader. And look, I'm not the world's best leader by any means. I'm still learning that, and that also is a driver for me. Whenever I can have an opportunity to be around a leader and pick up some things. And one of the ways that I do that a lot, Chief, is I'm heavily involved in business CEO groups. So I've got 3 different groups, peer groups, if you will, that that we're able to bounce things off of, and really get reality checks on ourselves relative to, geez, you ought to work on this relative to your self-regulation or whatever it is. And so if you can get around people who will tell you the truth and give you the straight talk and being a better leader, that's really critically important in my eyes. And whatever that mode is, today, I don't think I hop in my car for more than any drive that's over 20 minutes. I'm listening to a podcast, whether it's yours or, the leadership podcast, which is one that our company sponsors. I mean, gosh, they've got these amazing admirals and generals. And so I really love, one of the leaders areas that I turn to most is the military. As being in that business now, we hire a lot of veterans. We have just as we have Bobby Halton on a fire advisory board, we also have a defense advisory board that has 2 generals and 3 admirals. And, I just, when I'm around them, that you learn so much from these great Americans that, some of it's bound to rub off. So I think it's incredibly important.
So, what are some foundational elements of a good leader?
Gosh, I think there's so many. I mean, I just was paging through Soul before we got on here today, and there's, I think I have one section that has 3 bullet points of, admirable leadership qualities, particularly as they relate to authentic leadership. So I think being authentic, being who you are, having some regulation on it still is critical. But I think it's hard to be a leader if you're not comfortable with who you are, what you're, and I think I think a big part of that, if it doesn't come naturally, those things have to be worked on. But I think a big part of that has to be just a natural, it's not about you, putting others first. Balancing this concept of being confident yet humble at the same time is something that I know a lot of leaders talk to. I'm a big believer in being an example setter, and all my life I don't have to do it now, but I still do. I kind of pride myself on being the first one in the office and the last one to leave every day. I certainly don't need to do that, but I also truly love what I do. I pop out of bed like a piece of toast in the morning. I can't wait to get to work. So I think that you've got to love what you're doing. I think in general, relationships in general, whether it's with your spouse or whether it's with your customers or your coworkers, I think it's hard to underestimate the importance of building trust by doing what you say you're going to do time and time again, and doing a little bit more. And, Amy Covey, who's a Harvard business professor, she talks a lot about people will size you up within 30 seconds, and they will ask themselves subliminally, can I trust this person and can I respect this person? So, I think over time, we first impressions are critical, and they're hard to maybe reverse if you get out of the box, wrong, in a tough relationship. But trust has got to be built over time. I also think a lot about the importance of respecting everyone, and I think a lot often of Muhammad Ali, who said, I never judge people on how they treat me. I judge them on how they treat people around me. It's whether it's a servant or the person who's opening the door or whatever. So I think this respect, it's one of our company core values. I've got a little laminated card I'm showing you here that has our company core values on one side, and everyone in our business can recite these. It fits inside your pocket. On the other side is our mission, our purpose, our vision, and our strategic direction. So everybody knows exactly where we're headed. When I think of the fire service, I'm so we just have, we've had a mantra or a company tagline for about 30 years that trusted since 1908, and we just recently modified it in 2023 as getting out of the box to "You serve others, we serve you" is our new tagline moving forward this year. And and I think of the life of service that fire service and fire chiefs and military. I mean, it's so humbling to be in a position where we support, folks like you over the years, and we do that. We realize we're not the ones running into the burning buildings or in the firefight in, the Middle East or whatever, but we are there. We take it very seriously that we are providing life-saving equipment that we know lives depend on, your lives depend on. And so making sure that we're, continuing to, that gives us high purpose. When we talk about attracting, good people to your company, I guess roughly 50% of our employees are either former firefighters or warfighters, and they love and they truly get our sense of purpose at Darley. It's not, passion can't be faked, right? And they see it in our daily actions. So I suppose other things, I think of this compassionate leadership that we talked about. I think great leaders are really good listeners, and their reactive leadership. There's an old adage that says people support what they help to create, and I know that I see it in our company. We involve over 70 employees in our strategic plan. So they actually get a chance to tell us where they think we should be going. They understand the plan. They know where they get it. And probably the last thing, I'm big right now on, what would your bumper sticker say? There's so much leadership stuff. So if you can bring it down to what would your leadership bumper sticker say? I think Alan Brunacini, his is, be nice, right? I mean, very similar to my wife's. My wife's was actually be kind, but very similar. I think mine today, and it's changed throughout the years, mine today is earn it. It's just kind of make sure that you are putting forth the effort. You don't become a leader just by a title. You've got to earn it day in and day out. You're only as good as your last performance. Yep. What is it? It takes a lifetime to build that, that reputation, and a minute to squander it. So I just think it's making sure that, and if you look, you generally do good things, karma, generally good things are going to happen to you, right?
Yep. No, I agree. I think, in the Leadership Crucible, we have two mantras, pay it forward and leave it better than you found it.
Yeah, I love it. Yes, I'm familiar. Yeah,
from a leadership perspective, if you can do those two things, and I think there's probably a third one for me, and that's service over self. No matter what profession you're in, if you take that attitude, I think you'll be successful as a person.
Yeah, that's so great. We had my uncle, my father's brother, just turned 90, and he's at the end of kind of his life. And we celebrated. We had a family meeting over the holidays, and with that, we actually, and he has terminal cancer, but we actually took time to. Everyone in the family said wonderful things about him, and I tell you, I think of him as being a second fiddle to my father. I didn't say it at the time, but I had written him a note about it. But as I think of it, and I remember when I was at Northwestern getting my MBA, there's a whole case study on the importance of the second fiddle and how important he is to or she is to the orchestra. And so it's just a really, I think the importance of being selfless. And so many people, my cousin Jeff and others, talked about the selflessness that my uncle displayed in his entire life. That's right up at the top there as well. So I love those. I love the adage. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I think the orchestra also demonstrates what any organization is. I mean, it's 75 people that are getting together to make music. May not be music. It may be fire trucks. It may be selling, phones, whatever. But that organization is built around the cohesiveness and the music that they create together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that comes back to the culture. It also comes back to the leadership that puts the importance of every one that works for them at the forefront. And I think when leaders like yourself do that, and you've done that very effectively, you build a great team.
Yeah, it certainly is. I give a lot of speeches on leadership and on my book, and I think my first slide is, look, it's not about you, right? So I know I've heard a lot of your readers talk about it's that selflessness, and right on. It's leadership. It's all about everybody else, right?
Yep, it is. It really is. So what takeaways would you like to leave the audience today that may help them become a better person or a better leader as they move forward through their journey in life?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll tell you, at the risk of repeating myself, but maybe a summary, I think this first is be authentic. Find out who you are, work on your shortcomings, listen to different constituents, different groups, ask their opinion, incorporate their opinion, push decision-making down into the organization where the decisions are best known, and let them take credit for their change within the organization. I think the second would maybe be find a mentor or a peer group or someone to help coach you throughout your life, and somebody's really going to be able to give you a gut check and tell you where you're doing well and more importantly, where you're not doing well. I think lead by example, making sure that you're the pace setter in the organization, but at the same time maintaining a sense of balance. I'm a part of a group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and I'm no longer that young, but it's lifelong learning now. And their symbol is a triangle, and it's a triangle because it talks about the balance in your business, your personal life, and your family life. And if any of those are out of whack, it's really hard to be a good leader. In any environment. If you've got poor relationships at home, I think that also, as we talked about this compassion and empathetic leadership. I think like a Bobby Halton, passion can't be faked. I think it trumps just about everything, and it's hard to have that passion unless you truly, are drinking the Kool-Aid. You truly believe in the mission that you're doing. And again, I think those in the fire service, you see it really quickly in those who have got the passion. And probably lastly, it's this integrity. It's our, here's my card again. Our number one core value is integrity. And I think back to my grandmother, Darley, who, was really the matriarch. My father's mother, of course, was really kind of the matriarch of our family. And she came over from Eastern Europe at a young age, and really frugal. But she also would always tell us as young kids, look, if you don't want it on the front page of the Chicago Daily News at that time, the Chicago Tribune, don't do it. And so I think be guided by what do we say? Integrity is often, or ethics. Integrity is what you do when people aren't watching or whatever, and nobody's aware. So I think we often think of just making those right decisions. I often think, what would my dad do in this position? What would, you all know, what would Jesus do, connotation. So I think really sitting back and not making decisions too rashly might be the other one, making sure there's I can't remember the exact term, but there's in leadership, there's often, it's a bias that goes to the last person that you just talked to. And there's also a bias that you get from the first person that you talked to. So making sure that as leaders, we step back, we get the whole story, not analysis paralysis. I mean, as leaders, we generally have to make decisions with 80% of the information or less. If you belabor it beyond that, it's it's ineffective in many ways. But making sure that we don't rush in like a bull when we hear something, and because there's usually three sides to most stories, right? His, hers, and in the middle, and making sure that we're then coming in and giving our opinion or rendering decisions based on as much facts as we have, but also maybe with a caveat at times that leaves an opening for people to where they don't feel they've been abandoned by an organization or something if it's a significant decision. So I suppose those are probably the top ones that come to mind, Randy.
Well, I sure appreciate that. And Paul, thanks for taking time to be on the Leadership Crucible podcast, and the insight that you provided has been really significant today, and I appreciate you taking the time to do so.
Well, it was a great honor. I don't consider myself a great leader, but I'm constantly learning, and thank you for your leadership over the years, sir.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.